Hi, good day. My name is Kathy Souza, and I'm here to talk to you today about marriage and family therapy's role in the divorce and legal processes. Um, what we know is that there is a role, but before I want to give you some statistics about divorce before we move on, it's interesting to know that one half of all first marriages will end in divorce, and 60% of all second marriages will end in divorce. So, divorce is at an all high level at this point, even though Gallagher and Waite 2000 have told us that 93% of Americans still view a happy marriage as one of the most important goals in life. So what that tells us is that there's a lot of disillusionment and disappointment, I guess, associated with that, and that will give us some information as we go into talking about the divorce process and how that goes for a lot of people. Um, so, I'm sorry. Well, the primary issues to be resolved in a divorce will be financial issues and division of property. And most times that's handled by lawyers, sometimes by mediators, or alternative dispute resolution. But the MFT will not have any role in that area. But basically, the area of concern to family therapists will be the custody and child support negotiations. Uh, so, Denby, 2016, um, he talks about a model of intervention, I guess, for therapists, and that's called parenting coordination. In any event, he gives us some information about, the fact that when parents divorce, they are going through the process of ending what used to be, presumably, a romantic relationship, and yet there, if there are children involved, then they are maintaining their co-parenting roles, and that can be extremely difficult to negotiate because the ending of the romantic relationship involves a lot of emotion, sometimes pain, hurt, those kinds of things. And if a parent can't resolve those issues uh, during the divorce or before the divorce, then very often that plays out into the negotiations around the children. And that's where that overflow ends up in being a lot of bitterness and resentment in the negotiation about the children. So approximately 10 to 15% of families remain in a high conflict mode a year or 2 years after their divorce. Um, and in these marriages where there's destined to be high conflict, um, those are the marriages that can have some real hatred rather than sort of that kind of indifference about the person that you're divorcing, right? And yeah, that defense against the sadness and loss of the marriage, like I said, plays into the blaming the other partner for the breakdown in the marriage, and viewing that person as the enemy. Um, and so clearly you can see that you can't really negotiate or discuss things amicably with someone who you view as your adversary, which is very unfortunate, really, when it comes to child custody. So, parents, you know, in their hostility, may, after the separation, be using the children as, to carry hostile messages to one another, or really encouraging kids to take sides. So families, or parents, I should say, really need some assistance with this, because Demby quotes Kelly 2000 as saying that, um, you know, these are very strong risk factors that negatively affect children's psychological adjustment after a divorce. So, on the other hand, Nelson 2017, in her research on sort of re-examining the research on parental conflict and co-parenting and custody, talks about the fact that the quality of the co-parenting relationship can have a significant impact generally in child custody hearings, and that sometimes judges and even other participants in the process can view conflict as a barrier, like an unquestionable barrier to joint custody. And what she's saying is that that's not always the case, and one has to look at the relationship between the parent and the child first and foremost when discussing, what's in the best interest of the child. So, it's not to say that the level of parental conflict doesn't impact the child negatively, but that might not be a reason not to have a joint custody arrangement, and that there should be efforts made in sort of reducing the conflict between parents, and most importantly is improving their parenting skills. So the roles of therapists in working with families of divorce are, there's quite a few opportunities. I've mentioned mediation, alternative dispute resolution. There's a thing called collaborative divorce, which is a team of people that, like a multidisciplinary team, and parent coordinator facilitation, as well as conducting court-requested evaluations and assessments. So where am I? Okay, so Zimmerman, 2016, talked about how in particular, he was talking about psychologists, but how a psychologist's skills can be used for transforming conflict or reducing conflict in divorce. And the most important thing is, sort of knowing the scope of of your practice. So lawyers and mental health professionals can work alone in providing mediation services for parents and helping them agree on terms around the divorce. Many therapists are qualified to help parents decide on a parenting plan that, in particularly, taking into account the developmental needs of the child. And that's where the expertise of the mental health professional is in the knowledge of what a child needs on a developmental level, and what would be helpful for a child in that regard. So what we need to know is that as mental health professionals, that what's our limits, what are the limits of our competence, what are our areas that require our participation. So when it comes to sort of financial advice and certainly legal advice, that would not be an area that the marriage and family therapist would get into. Knowing the limits and the scope of what your expertise is, and what what the request is for you to participate. So the other thing is, of course, that in order to even practice in this capacity as a mental health practitioner, you need to have the appropriate training. And it's critical that there's some background information into how these processes work, knowing the laws of your jurisdiction, um, and understanding that there's a way to practice, and knowing what that is. So helping families cope with the pain, turmoil, uncertainties of divorce, and we need to know and be assured that we're offering useful recommendations that are at the highest standard of ethics, right? Ethical standards of care. Uh, Therapists providing services to family of divorce need to help children have a voice, right? That's something that we can do. And knowing what's in the best interest of the child, hearing the child's voice, knowing what is important to the child, and then incorporating that into the parenting plan, if you will. So Cheeseman, 2007, is cited by Zimmerman and others in their paper on ethical professional considerations in divorce and child custody cases. The Cheeseman 2007 put together some guidelines about determining best interest of the child, and that breaks down to number one, the child's preference and needs. Number two, the ability of the parent to meet the child's needs. And then number three, the ability of the arrangements and the respective parents to provide a stable environment, including maintaining the child's connections in community and educational and social realms. And four is providing for the parent to maintain like a decent relationship. So recognizing one's role in supporting the other parent's relationship with the child, or the child's relationship with the parent, and being aware of and providing for any special needs. So those are some, pretty important guidelines, and ones that seem, really appropriate to consider and put into place. So when there develops a common understanding of what is in the child's best interest, and that is what is in the child's best interest is to have a safe and healthy relationship with both parents that ideally communicate with one another. Therapists in all divorce service roles can help divorcing spouses sort of structure, define their relationship solely as parents, and not as sort of moving out of that partner in a romantic relationship role, and really seeing themselves just as parents of these children or this child, in a way that helps the child be the center of the communication. That's an important role for us to take. So issues faced by court-appointed therapists. Now that's interesting. If you're appointed by a judge to conduct an assessment or to have a role in a divorce proceeding, there are some things that need to be taken into consideration, and Hess 1988, as cited by Zimmerman, suggests that on accepting the referral, the most important things are for the therapist to be really clear about the facts of the case, and to see if you have the skills that are relevant to make you competent to take on this referral. You want to know who the parties are so that you can avoid any conflicts of interest, conflicts in working with attorneys who don't understand your role, that kind of thing. And you want to be clear about fees. So the court has appointed you, but who's responsible for the fees, and then finally, what's the scope of your involvement? Also, being really clear about who the client is. That's going to be something that would have to be ironed out and resolved as well. And also, if when you know that an assessment or a recommendation is going to be put forward by yourself, then you need to make sure that everybody you're dealing with knows the limits of confidentiality, that knows what your role is in reporting to the court. Um, who is protected and who can authorize release of information? Really important. Some of that's involved in your state legislation, and some of it is in your, ethical guidelines. And knowing that the therapist can't offer third parties any kind of guarantee. Whoever's in the room, you can't guarantee that what their confidentiality is. You can only guarantee your own. So in recommending a particular procedure, knowledge of the research is imperative. Whatever recommendations you're making, whatever evaluations you're making, has to be backed up by solid peer-reviewed research, demonstrating that the level of practice is consistent. Your level of practice is consistent with current research and standards of practice, and having a responsibility to offer, like I said, the useful recommendations and opinions based on knowledge of child development and parenting, and the impact of parental conflict, poor communication, and parental psychiatric and other diagnoses on children. This knowledge must be based on an impartial and informed reading of relevant literature. That's critical. Yeah, I mentioned the collaborative divorce. Collaborative divorce is a family-centered process, and it involves attorneys, mental health professionals, and perhaps some financially suitable people. It involves coaching through parents through the divorce process, and then often coming up with the parenting plan that's going to carry them into the post-divorce stage. I mentioned earlier parenting coordination, and Stephen Demby, again, 2016, wrote an article on the applying clinical thinking to the management and resolution of post-divorce conflict. Went into quite details about parent coordination, recognizing that it's a non-adversarial, child-focused dispute resolution process. So you want to settle the dispute, monitor and facilitate compliance, and reduce children's exposure to the damaging conflict that can arise between parents. Some additional objectives include improving communication between parents and educating parents about the needs of their children, psychologically, for example. So it's kind of like a hybrid psychological legal intervention where the parent coordinator can intervene to assist in making these things happen. So making sure the practitioner has to make sure that you have the appropriate knowledge, training, and skills, i.e., the competencies to carry out this role. And again, the training. There's parental coordination training, just like there's collaborative divorce training. You must avail yourself of those trainings so that you're sure that you're competent to do those things. Now, the association, the American Association of Marriage and Family Therapy, has a code of ethics in this area of working with courts and that type of thing, and those are all consistent with the things that I've already mentioned to you before, and that information is available to all of us, and we should always make sure that we are practicing in compliance with the AAMFT code of ethics. So being sure that you review that before you take on any type of role in any realm anyway, but particularly in this area of dealing with custody and divorce issues. Well, I hope the information that I provided has been helpful. You've got something out of the few minutes that I had to spend with you today, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you.